We're here at Carnarvon Park in Oak Bay, the remnant of the old Willows Camp, where the 259th Battalion deployed 94 years ago today on December the 21st, 1918, bound for Vladivostok, Russia, as part of the Allied intervention in the Civil War. And they left the camp at 7:30 a.m. and like them, we're going to leave for the march over to the Rithet's Wharf on the harbor.
And they were here for 6 weeks, you said?
They had been here for about 6 weeks. It was a muddy autumn. The Spanish influenza had been spreading. The troops were quarantined here. The war had ended in Europe. There were protest meetings being organized by the local labor movement that soldiers attended in large numbers. They bought newspapers that was questioning why the Canadians were going to Russia. And so that was the context when these soldiers deployed out of the camp and just a short time later mutinied in downtown Victoria. So here we are at the corner of Carrick and Fair Street in Oak Bay, and this would have been very close to the southwesterly boundary of the Willows exhibition grounds, which ran for close to a kilometer up to the north and a few hundred meters across. And so from the late 1800s until around the time of the Second World War, this was a very large horse racing track and exhibition ground. And in wartime, in World War I, this was the site of the Willows Camp. 100 Victorians died and 2,700 fell ill from the Spanish flu. Okay. And there was dozens of deaths within the Siberian force. So this was the context when the troops deployed. When the war ended on November 11th, the meetings were still banned. James's son had died on the Lusitania.
Oh yeah.
And his killing partially resulted in the major riots downtown when a half dozen German-owned establishments were trashed.
Right, yeah.
And there were similar sort of anti-German riots in Calgary and Toronto and I think other cities.
Yeah. Sorry, what year? The 1916?
When did 15? I think was when the Lusitania went down.
Wait,
yeah,
that's when the riots happened.
Yeah, someone just wrote a thesis, an MA thesis. It's really good on it. So it wasn't just the Kaiserhof Hotel, which is where Demitas is. It was also all around Broad Street, like German-owned offices and warehouses, and there was a lot of property. German-owned breweries over on Government towards where the other breweries are now.
Good morning, fellow citizens.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Art Ferguson and I live in the city of Victoria. And I'm here today to mark a remembrance of a tragic and shameful piece of Victoria's history in which genuinely oppressed working class members of Canadian society from Quebec were forced to go to Soviet Union, to Russia, to defeat and to overthrow the communists who were actually taking over the country at that time. The idea was that we were to stop the communist menace and we were going to restore the monarchy in Russia, which was not the intent of the Military Service Act of 1916. So we are here today to mark the event in which on this corner in 1918, on December 21st, that brave soldiers from Quebec stood fast and said they weren't going to go to Siberia. On y va pas à Siberie, they said. We will not go to Siberia. And that's where they were intending to take these soldiers to fight the Bolshevik menace. With us today are two historians, Ben Isett and Larry Hannett, who have some interesting things to say. Ben has written a seminal book on this particular episode called From Victoria to Vladivostok, and we'll have Ben have a few words with us right now.
Thanks everyone. So last year we were here just for the ceremony. This year we've started all the way in Oak Bay, and we're building towards future events in future years, and the main goal is to build towards 2018. So this is the seeds of an action that's going to be the last commemoration of Canada's role in the Great War. And it's important to be here today. So next year I think we'll combine the walk and this ceremony at this spot. So just to give a recap of the mutiny, the soldiers had left the Willows Camp in Oak Bay at about 7:30 in the morning. They stopped here at this intersection at about 8:20 because every 50 minutes in the British Army, the soldiers would march for 50 minutes and then they would take a 10-minute break. So on December the 21st, 1918, they reached this intersection at 8:20. The soldiers had their break, and then the commanding officer blew his whistle at 8:30 to resume the march. A group of French Canadians near the back of the march refused to stop, and the commanding officer shouted, "Fall in," suggesting that they resume the march. Well, another one of them shouted from the back, "On y va pas en Siberie." Another shouted in English, "Outwards turn," suggesting that they turn around and head back to the Willows Camp. Some fighting broke out. The commanding officer fired a gun at the soldiers' feet. He fired it over their head. Still they wouldn't march, and so he ordered the obedient troops to take off their canvas belts and whip the mutinous soldiers back into line. For about 10 or 15 minutes, there was a major fight here at the corner of Fort and Quadra Street, and then the commanding officer called up a guard of honor, which was 50 loyal soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with rifles and fixed bayonets. When the mutinous troops saw that, after having been whipped and shot with bullets flying above their head and near their feet, they grudgingly decided to march. And so the 259th Battalion was herded at bayonet point down to the Rithet's Wharf by the Coast Guard station today near Dallas Road. And so that was the inglorious departure of Canada's Siberian expedition for the far east of Russia. Just a few months later, they would come home without having seen combat, as the Canadian government decided the expedition was futile. So this was a fiasco, as a member of Parliament from Quebec described it in the House of Commons, and it was Canada's first military foray in Russia, the first military foray in Asia, and it signaled both Canadian obedience to the imperial powers of the day, but also the Canada attempting to take a more robust stand within the world system of imperialism. And I think it's important to remember these French-Canadian farmers who came here to Victoria against their will, but stood up for their rights as human beings in declaring "On y va pas en Siberie." And we continue to demand their pardon and a full apology from the Canadian authorities for their treatment, and an apology to their families.